everybody. I'm very glad to be with you tonight to share someone who happens to be the patroness of our own community. And she's one of these people that we know very little about. She's in the Catholic rank of a doctor of the church. We'll talk about that little bit later. But sometimes some of these people we consider quite odd have very much to share with us. And so I'm going to just uh, start by showing a tribute volume that I was just showing to Phil. Uh, it is in the little side picture here. That's a picture of Catherine, uh, that drawn by one of our artist sisters. She is pictured here with the stigmata. She was a stigmata saint, along with like Francis of Assisi, who carried the wounds of Jesus. But Catherine's were not publicly visible because she asked that they not be visible. And Jesus said to her, "We can arrange that." She didn't want the publicity that this would draw, and so this was granted to her. This is a volume by Suzanne Nufke, a Dominican woman who died here at our community in 2020. Suzanne was a linguist, and she also did all of the writings of Catherine of Siena from the Sienese, which is a dialect of Italian. Siena is North Italy, and this is where Catherine was born. Now, what we're going to learn about her is almost really a ride. So we can go to the first slide, Phil. Okay. Uh, I think as we look at the time that she lives, she was born in 1347. Uh, that is, if you really check things out context-wise, that's the height of the Black Death. And as you know, that was a mixture probably of bubonic plague and cholera that the Crusaders probably brought back from the Middle East because they had God knows what on their boots as they came back in their ships or came back on foot. And what they brought back in the holds of their ships included the rats that accompanied the spices and the silks that they brought from the Middle East. And in the years following some of that Middle Eastern combat against the Muslim community taking over the holy sites, this disease spread throughout Europe to such an extent that smaller villages would wake up in a morning and find that the majority of their village had died during the night. It is thought that one half to two-thirds of Europe perished in the Black Death. It was something like COVID on steroids. And so she was born at the peak of the 3 years where the worst of this happened. So just to give a little context, she was the 23rd of 24 children. Yes, you're reading that correctly. There were several twins in her family, and she was the last set. Her sister Isabella, the mother could not handle the two of them, and she gave Isabella to what is called a wet nurse, a woman who could nurse that child, while Lapa, the mother, took care of Catherine. And so those were the circumstances she was brought up in. When Isabella was somehow, separated from the mother, Isabella died. And as a result, Catherine became the apple of Alapa's eye, and she doted on Catherine because she had survived. And so she grew up above what we would call a dyer's store. In Siena, her father was a dyer, similar to Francis of Assisi's father. He dealt with cloth that was dyed for those who were going to make garments. And so he was downstairs and the family lived upstairs. And I want you to try and picture this. The 20 some children in this family married and moved in with their spouses if they were girls, uh, or boys rather. If it depended. In those days, very often the bride was taken to the husband's family and lived with that family. And so if they were girls, they went to their spouse's family. If they were boys, the spouses and children were in that upstairs apartment all over the place. This young girl was not unfamiliar with birthing and dying. She was very used to it. And then comes an early childhood experience when she was 6. On the hill outside Siena was a church run by the Dominican friars. The Dominicans were a century old. They were founded in really 12 by 12, 16, starting with a group of women in 1206. But Dominic began the men of the order to go to the universities in about 1216. So now we're looking at, I think we're having some technical trouble here. Yeah, my electricity is going on and off. So just hang in there. If we get blocked out, well, we'll just say goodnight. But anyway, uh, what happened is she was coming back from mass. She was 6 years old with her brother, one of her brothers, and above the cathedral church of the Dominicans, she saw the heavens open up and she saw Christ as king on a throne, smiling down at her. She saw it clearly, and that was it. She was smitten. 6 years old. And she decided that this is what she was going after for the rest of her life. And so she became a problem child in that family. She decided, and she was wanting to pray a lot, and it drove her mother crazy. And so her mother decided this nonsense had to stop. And so she planned a supper in which she invited a suitor because she wanted to marry Catherine off to a well-to-do gentleman to kind of substantiate the other brothers and sisters who were part of that household. She didn't want anything less for Catherine. And she wanted to get these crazy ideas out of her young mind. So Catherine now was in her teens, and Lapa arranged the supper, and the suitor appeared, and Catherine was late. So she waited patiently, and down the stairs came Catherine with a babushka on her head, which, is a European term for a scarf, a kind of a head covering. And Lapa looked at her and said, "Well, it's about time. And what's this?" And she ripped off the babushka, and Catherine had cut off all her hair. So she looked like a porcupine. And the suitor really excused himself because he probably had another appointment. Lapa, the mother, was so enraged at this that she said, "We are dismissing the maid and we are dismissing the cook, and you will clean this house and you will cook the food for this family. And this nonsense is going to end." So that's exactly what happened. And by the way, you will no longer sleep with the girls. You will sleep with your brothers. So that's the way Lapa took care of this incident that followed upon Catherine's fixation with this early childhood experience. So that's exactly what happened. She began to cook. She began to clean everything, to empty the chamber pots and take care of all the debris. And one morning, as she was cooking in the kitchen, it was getting time for lunch, and her father came from downstairs getting ready for lunch. and she was sprawled face down in the fireplace. She had been praying and she went into ecstasy and she was in the fireplace. And he yelled and pulled her out by her feet, and there was not a mark on her after her being in the fire. So he finally took his place with the pants in the family, and he called everybody together and he said, "That's enough. This child is to be left alone. She is not going to be cooking. She is not going to be cleaning. If she wants to pray, she's going to be left to pray." He was jarred out of his senses. He didn't understand what was going on here at all. And so he gave her a little room under the stairs. So let's go to the next slide. Now, everybody here on the screen knows what Lappa's plans were going to be kind of thwarted, and her punishment then was lifted, and her father gave her this, these little rooms under the stairs we used to have in our early houses. Well, she got that little room that she could have for her own. And for 2 years, she lived in that little room under the stairs. And I don't know how she took care of all of her hygiene. I don't know how. They must have brought her food because she didn't eat with the family. And she, during that time, somehow learned to read. She never went to school a day in her life, this child, never went to school at all. But she would pray the office coming from whatever handwritten, because there was no printing press until 1440. So anything that she was imitating the friars down at the church had to be handwritten. She would pray, "Glory be to the Father, and to you, and to the Holy Spirit," when she would get to the end of a psalm. And then after 2 years of this, the Lord said to her, "Catherine, go to supper with the family." She said, "What? This is just getting good." He said, "Go to supper with the family. You have to learn to walk on two legs, Catherine. You have fastened your attention on myself, and that's appropriate. But now you have to deal with your neighbor." So Catherine left her little room under the stairs and surprised everybody by coming to the supper table. And the next morning, we can go to the next slide. The next morning began her visitation to the cancer hospital. The cancer hospital was the hopeless case hospital. This is where people were taken when they were even beyond hospice, when they were dying, because nobody knew what to do with them, and they didn't want to catch their diseases. So she nursed there. And one of the women she nursed rewarded her by passing stories that she was having an affair with the friars, the Dominicans up on the hill. She worked at the cancer hospital, and during that time, she gathered people around her who were probably trying to help these poor people who were dying. And she gathered everybody from, this girl did not enter a convent. She never entered a convent. She was a laywoman all her life. She wanted to join what is called the Montellati, which were lay Dominicans in the Dominican order, and they were only widows. And she was a young teenager. She was barely 20 at this time. And so they wouldn't accept her. So she went with her mother to some hot springs, went too close to the vents, and got severely burned. Well, then when she was slightly disfigured, the Montellati accepted her because she probably wasn't marriageable. So she joined these lay Dominicans and wore the Dominican habit, but she never entered a community. Instead, people like cardinals, bishops, hermits, prostitutes, the wives of some very wealthy bureaucrats became her followers, and she called them her famiglia, her little family. And many of them referred to her as Mama. And she's a 20 something years old. And all that we know is that she would start to pray, and the secretaries, some of her followers would run and get their stylus and their to take notes. And they would write down what she would be saying because she'd talk out loud when she'd pray. And then she'd come to, and then she would visit with them and go to the cancer hospital and whatever else she did. So these people were kind of her hangouts, her hangarounds. And during this time, she began to write her letters. She didn't write, she could not write. So these secretaries would take the dictation that she gave them. It ended up, she had 400 of them. She wrote to bishops, to cardinals to tell them to stop being corrupt. She began to work with the legislators of Siena and Venice. They were in great different, they had family like guilds at that time. And these families would be in competition with one another and they would war with each other. She would go in and mediate between these two rival families. And she would write bishops, and she finally began to write to the Pope, who had left Rome. The Rome of this time, 1300, was a mosquito-infested swamp. As you were going to find out in history, it was during the time of Luther that the present Rome was being built and cleaned up. And that's why the indulgence thing happened to split the church in pieces, because the Dominicans were employed by the Franciscans who had been made the fundraisers for this building project in Rome to clean the place up. This is 1300. So the Pope left and he went to France and he set up shop in Avignon with his court, his feudal court at that point. Well, she wrote him and she said in no easy terms, Your Holiness, you belong in Rome. You are taking sides. And of course, you know that at this period there was this terrible uh, rivalry between France and Germany. Well, this Avignon papacy set the stage for the Reformation. That's really what got the fire burning. And she said, Go back home where you belong. That's where Peter and Paul had died and are buried. You belong in Rome, not in Avignon. And the Pope said, Sorry, it's nice here. So finally, she went with her familia. A couple of her family traveled with her, and she went to Rome. When she entered the Avignon court of the papacy, she couldn't stay. Her spiritual sense was so attuned that she would have gotten sick. The stench of the finery and the powdered wigs and the clothing and the gold and decoration made her nauseous. So she left after saying to the Pope, You must go back. The unity of the church depends on it. And he was absolutely scared to death of her because he knew she was very close to God and he was taking care of his own tail. She goes and leaves, and he decides he has to go back. Gathers his entourage and goes back to Rome in the fall and dies by December, saying, Never listen to a woman. This then sets the stage for what is going to become the schism of the terrible breakdown of where there were three popes at one time. and they called a council, deposed them all, and elected one pope to end this terrible situation. This is something that the church should never have survived. Never should it have survived. Next slide. Okay. Uh, during this time, she prays often, and she talks. She always talks. She's talking out loud to God, and these secretaries are scribbling, writing, and of course the writing, the language is Sienese. She's a Sienese woman, and so they keep writing these talks that she has with God. It's called the dialogue. It's a book that it says, and God said, and blah, 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 blah. And then I said, blah, 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 blah. So it's a dialogue like someone's diary. And they kept track of this. And she would just tell them whenever she traveled to take care of these feuds in Italy, she'd say, just be sure and bring my book. She knew they were writing this, and she kept writing her letters. She wrote letters to prostitutes. She wrote letters to hermits. She wrote letters to cardinals. She knew what they were doing. She wrote letters to the Pope, as I had said. She to married ladies who are having trouble with their husbands. She wrote, there are 400 of them. And Suzanne Nufke, that I mentioned in the beginning, who had the tribute volume written in her honor, has translated all of them. There are 4 volumes of the letters, 100 in each volume. Her prayers, there are 12 of them, distinct prayers of of how she used to talk to God. Her prayers are published, being translated by Suzanne. Her entire dialogue has been translated and is published by Paulist Press. She became one of the 4 first women doctors of the church whose writings were published in that spirituality series that Paulist Press put out some time ago. And she is the only doctor of the church among the women that is not cloistered and never was in a convent. She's a lay woman. The other 3 are Teresa of Avila, who was a Carmelite, Hildegard of Bingen, who was a Benedictine, and Therese de Lisieux was a Carmelite, cloistered also. So this woman is what you'd call a rogue. She is somebody that no convent could contain her. She was politically active. She was involved in politics, working with disputes and consultations, and she was in her 20s. She would die at age 33. She was also what we would call today anorexic. She ate nothing except the Eucharist. When she received communion, that's what sustained her. She could swallow the host, but she ate no ordinary food. And God knows what she looked like by the time she died at age 33. So she wrote her dialogue, she wrote her prayers, and she wrote all of her letters. Now, next slide. The remarkable spirituality of this woman came by the way that she wrote both her prayers and her dialogue. She writes with images. She uses images, and I'll give you some examples as we close this today. Her role in spirituality is unique because it's simply the same role that Jesus used in using images to teach. Now, the reason why that's so important in spirituality is not only that it's key to imitating the gospel, but it's psychologically very effective. The the anthropology that is used for the human being is very truncated. You hear body, mind, and spirit, body, mind, and spirit in all your literature, body, mind, and spirit. Do you notice anything missing there? Where are emotions in that triad? Part of the mind? Part of the spirit? What's the spirit, and how does the spirit differ from the mind? That's not adequate. That's not an adequate anthropology. And so what she did is she made the link. She made a link through her imagery in a time when psychology didn't even exist between emotion and cognition, which is what the Gospels do. First, you're grabbed by the image, and then you're hooked, and you're paying attention. And then comes the truth that explodes from the image. And that's Catherine. That's what Catherine does. In distinction to the other three doctors of the church, except Hildegard. Hildegard of Bingen also was very, very highly image-centered because she knew that it was the way that people learned. So an adequate triad of human anthropology is really organism, which is the physical functions, psyche, which includes your imagination and your image capacity, and your emotional motors, all 11 of them, dreams, and that's highly neglected in our current view in spirituality of the human person, just as it is in our education. Our education is highly cognitive. And as emotional intelligence is neglected in our current educational system. When imagery is prominent, then emotional intelligence comes to the fore, and there's a bridging, there's a kind of a unification in the person. And so Catherine is instrumental in helping modern spirituality, even though she's a 14th century woman. She presents to us in her writings an image-based introduction to the relationship with God. That's her distinct role, and she does this as a lay woman. She has never lived in community, although she recommended to a lot of the people she wrote letters to go and join a community and to live in community for their spirituality to grow. So she is someone really who is unique in the whole rank of doctors of the church. She's one of the four women, first of all. She is not a cloistered woman, which is something else, and she becomes a doctor of the church. Now, let me explain what that is in the Catholic community so that you don't get a mistaken idea. The word doctor in this term has nothing to do with a degree. This woman could not, as far as we know, could not write. And as far as her reading ability, if she learned how to read, Christ himself taught her, or she couldn't have prayed with a written prayer form. So that's important to know. It does not have to do with intelligence, cognitive ability, skill, the ability to do research, produce a thesis, and then get a degree. No. The term doctor of the church, in the church's understanding, is a person who is taught through prayer. that by her love, by the longing and the desire of her will, she is so fixated, or he, there are, by the way, 34 men doctors of the church. There are 4 women doctors of the church. We won't make comments on that right now. You can talk about that when you have your questions. But the thing is, uh, it means being taught another way. It's wisdom learning that comes through prayer and then informs your intellect. It's the understanding in some modern theology that really you believe so that you can understand, not the other way around. You do not understand so you can believe. No. With these doctors of the church, these are people whose faith was so intense and their charity so on fire for knowing God that it kindled their intelligence. And they wrote and they taught and preached in ways that defy schooling. That's very, very unusual to the modern mind to understand that. But that's what doctor of the church means. It means they are wisdom teachers by experience, by the experienced spirituality, not learned spirituality. They could become mentors, as Teresa of Avila did, and Catherine did, because of experience, direct experience, not intellectual or book learning. It's a very different kind of understanding of what you might call uh, credentials, shall we say, credentials. So I'm going to bring this to a close here so we can have some discussion. But this is getting to know you and getting to know Catherine of Siena, this one doctor of the church who was not in a convent, but was politically and ecclesially very, very obstreperous, very, very, well, what can I say? She was just nobody you fool around with, including popes who did what they were told when she told them.